you're not the first person that's starting a business. So even if it's a unique business, there's principles that can be learned from every business. So I would invest in like a media platform or something that I can connect with people I'm trying to serve. And at the heart of it, a business owner, entrepreneur is kind of like, to some degree, underrepresented.
Yeah. And is there a sort of campaign or strategy that's like a real standout for you?
Yeah, so we
Meet Gresham Harkless Jr., entrepreneur, media strategist, and CEO of Blue 16 Media. He helps business leaders launch, grow, and scale smarter with media, tech, and franchising. With 1,600 plus podcasts, 6,000 plus blogs, and CEO hacks, he shares the tools and insights to help you win.
I'm curious from like a philosophy perspective with kind of you are a media company.
when I started to look at and thinking about that you are a media company, a lot of those seeds were planted there because I started to look at that industry, wanted to be in that industry, to not just talk about what you do, but why you do it and how you do it.
As you started to kind of piecemeal sort of clients and work together and then be able to be like, okay, I have something here. This is going to be the business. And then it became like, okay, now I know exactly what it is I'm going to do with this.
I think the maybe initial like aha moment was
All right, welcome to another episode of Built for This, Stories of a Maverick, the podcast where we dive into the moments, mindsets, and moves that shape extraordinary leaders and changemakers. I'm your host, Jenna, and today I'm joined by someone who has dedicated his career to helping others own their stories, amplify their voices, and lead with authenticity. Gresham, aka Gresh Harkless Jr., is the founder of CB Nation and Blue 16 Media, a branding visionary entrepreneur and community builder whose philosophy is simple but powerful. You are a media company. Through blogs, podcasts, and digital strategy, he's helping entrepreneurs and CEOs transform their message into impact and ensuring that underrepresented voices are heard loud and clear. In this conversation, we explore Gresh's journey from his early days at Howard and Georgetown to building platforms that serve thousands of business leaders, to his belief in media as both a strategy and a mission. Get ready to learn why visibility is more than marketing. It's leadership in action. Welcome.
Jenna, excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you too. I always love to kind of start off and learn a little bit more about sort of how you grew up, kind of what sort of led you onto this journey. So I would love to start there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the intro you read, it sounds so much better. I always just say I'm a very much so a busybody. I like to have my hands in a lot of different things, but probably like rewinding the clock years and years and years, I was probably very much so the same thing with my hands on a lot of different things. And I was the kind of the proverbial kid that sold potato chips on the playground. I got my parents to go to MJ Designs to buy me beads so I could make necklaces and things like that. But as much as I did those things, I don't necessarily know that I had like the entrepreneurial environment where someone had a business and said, hey, you should do this, you should do that. So I went the regular path, ended up going to school, came in as undecided, went to Howard University for my undergrad. I grew up in the Northern Virginia area as well too, and I said that I don't know what I want to do, but I'll kind of just figure it out. It's like college ended up kind of sneaking up on me faster than I thought it would. And so I came in undecided and I said, you know what? I don't know what I want to do, but I think I spent about a year and I decided to focus on English. And I did English largely because I loved writing, still love writing and just kind of creating from that standpoint. And I what really kind of was the seed that I think really said that, hey, this is your thing is when I was 10, my dad was in the military. So he served in the Air Force. He went to an entirely different country for about a year or so. And I boohooed, cried like a baby, all of those things. But at that time, I started what eventually became like a family newspaper. And the family newspaper was nothing grand. It was a Microsoft Word document that I used to put clip art in, and I would cover stories like a squirrel getting into my grandma's house, or my cousin was born. I was looking at, he was a feature story one month. But I
Yeah.
would just compile like all these things that were going on in our family. And I started to, and I read a lot of the newspaper too. So I would add in things like my mom really liked to watch the soap operas. So I would put in some soap opera digest things. I would put in some sports, information, African American history as well too. So I try to make it my own and just add all these things in. So, fast forward when I was at Howard, I said, hey, I don't know what I want to do, but I know that, at least some seeds were planted in that way. So I like writing, so let me try writing. And I felt like it was more of a skill than a subject, if that makes sense, because I felt like communication is something you're always going to need. So did that, thought I was going to go to law school. Didn't go to law school, got my master's in sports industry management. And then, from there, I hit the workforce and it was just like kind of it was an interesting journey after that for sure.
Yeah, I'm so curious. I know when you were doing the newspaper for your family, did you have any favorite, like, headlines you used in terms of putting it together that you're like, "Oh, this is a good one?"
You know what? I don't even think I was that far advanced at the time. It was just like, it's funny, like the headlines that I chose were like sentences, they're like very, very long and things like that. And I used a lot of like, punctuation, all those things, because I had the kids just trying to do those things. But it's so funny because my mom kept them, so I have like 2 years worth of them. And going back and just kind of looking at them is like, where and how did that come from? So that let me know that that is probably me, and probably a little bit more coming from within than anything else.
I love it. And so you kind of hit this point where you're like, okay, I think I might go this way. Nope. I think I might go this way. Nope. I deeply resonate with that as well. I didn't go into school being like, I know exactly what I want to be when I grow up. I'm like, I have no idea. And I had a few people around me who were always so certain about what they wanted to be and with like no sense of wavering. And I was like, like, maybe there's something wrong with me that I don't really like 150% believe I'm going to go be that thing or whatever that is. But I think as you start to get to explore, I think you get a bit more sense of creativity and you feel a little less like what I would imagine of like almost kind of like a chokehold of like you have to do this even if something else kind of piques your curiosity. So when you are here with like sports management in terms of your background, where you're like, "Okay, I'm gonna go, like, represent NHL, NBA, NFL players, like, this is gonna be amazing," or how did it kind of go from there once you were done school?
Yeah, I mean, after, this is like senior year, I'm like, I had these entrepreneurial tendencies. I should have at least minored in entrepreneurship. So I didn't do that. And I was like, okay, well, I tried and I applied to go to law school. So the plan was going to law school. I got a ton of rejection letters. I did get waitlisted at one school that I could potentially go to, but I was kind of gung ho on like, hey, if I got a full scholarship, I would go because I'm not sure if I want to go. And I hear so many people that go to law school, they get all the debt and they're like, hey. So I was like, I don't want to be that person. If I do, I want somebody else to kind of quote unquote fit that bill. So I said, I want to get an MBA. I'm a little bit young to get an MBA per se. I've heard like most people go into the workforce and they get their MBA. So I said, hey, I like sports. I might want to go to law school, be a sports agent. And oh, there's this sports management degree that's a little bit over a year. It has business classes. It's connected to sports, and if we really look at it, sports is ultimately like an industry or a business. So I said, let me do this, and then I'll kind of maybe gather myself and figure out and have a better plan of action. So, and this was also, by the way, during like the economic crisis, so a lot of crazy things were happening, and a lot of people were going back to school because they
Yep.
didn't know what to do. So it was also all that stuff going on too, which is not a minor thing to kind of mention, but yeah, that's what kind of led me to go there.
And then, so in terms of kind of how you stepped out in terms of the workforce, obviously, if you think sports is absolutely an industry and many of entrepreneurs have dovetailed off that, and especially even athletes themselves creating their own businesses either during their career or after when they can no longer play. Was there an avenue which you kind of wanted to attack that, or did you fully kind of look at it from like a digital marketing media perspective right away and start to build that business?
Yeah, I wish, I could, rewind back that clock and tell myself that to do the digital marketing part. But, honestly, I went into it, it sounds like very similarly to everything else. I knew that I was interested in entrepreneurship. So during that program, we had to do like a capstone project. It was a really cool program. Actually, it was only the second year of it. So it was actually a very entrepreneurial type of program in and of itself. But my capstone project, actually did it on sports entrepreneurship. So I started to compile like all the characteristics of successful entrepreneurs. So like we had an Under Armour class. So Kevin Plank, who was the founder of Under Armour, because he founded the company in his grandma's basement in Georgetown, and he went to UMD. We had an Under Armour class. So there was a lot of like entrepreneurial things. But for my capstone project, I said, hey, I want to actually interview, the people that are in sports, that are entrepreneurs. I want to kind of get an idea of like, if there were ingredients, if there were these things that led them to be successful, what would they be? And that's what I ended up doing for my capstone project. So it was kind of one of those things where I didn't really know in, but I just said that, hey, let me go with my tendencies, what I'm passionate about, and then just kind of let it guide me from there.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's something that says a lot about your character right away of like, I don't really know, but I'm excited and passionate about it. So I'm going to go this way. And I feel like a lot of times people suppress or ignore that. And either it's like, I want to go the safe route, or, my family wants me to go that direction, or, you know what, I'm not worthy enough. I'm not smart enough to go out and do that on my own. And that's what I always said is like, oh, I'm never going to go out on my own. That's crazy. Like, I'll be a great number two for somebody, but all that is too much shenanigans for me to like worry about. And then all of a sudden, one day I'm like, I quit and I'm going to go do this for myself. And I'm like, huh, I didn't really see that coming. And everybody else is like, we did. And I'm like, oh, okay. So you end up in that spot. And so I'm curious from like a philosophy perspective with kind of you are a media company. Simple, but like duh at the same time, which I love. How did that come to be, and sort of what was the launch pad for you to kind of go out on your own as your own business and company?
Yeah, absolutely. And I too had those same experiences actually, probably after school when I started to tell people, hey, I want to start my own thing and do my own thing. I got a lot of pushback. And it was like, hey, you're not ready. It's not the right time. You shouldn't do it. You're going to fail. I heard all those things. So it's very discouraging. I think for me, I've always been interested, like I said, in writing, and I really wanted to be a journalism major because I was always interested in journalism. Sports journalism was another reason I was like, hey, let me do this program because I thought I might go into that. But I really had that kind of focus on, now we call them content creators, but like creating, writing, doing those things there. And I started to read a lot and study a lot about the journalism industry. And that industry was and is still probably getting completely transformed, especially from a business model standpoint. So when I started to look at, and thinking about, being a media company, that you are a media company, a lot of those seeds were planted there. It's just because I started to look at that industry, wanted to be in that industry, but I didn't think it was stable. And I said, hey, I don't know exactly what this is going to look like, but maybe there's some opportunity here because something's being kind of transformed. And what I started to see is that a lot of people that were your quote unquote journalists were actually moving into storytelling, marketing, all these different aspects. Because if you look at those skills, they're very much so very in need in the business world. So I started to see a lot of people there. So fast forward a lot of years, I, took jobs, was laid off from a job, was going to get laid off from another job. I've had a lot of topsy turvy things that happened probably over that 3 to 4 year period.
Yeah.
And I think I took a job, I was laid off. I took that job, I took another job before I was going to get laid off again because I knew that job wasn't stable. And I said, hey, I have all these interests. Let me go into, doing the entrepreneurship route. So I did freelance writing. I decided to try to go in and do that. And then I heard, because I've always been a busybody, I always worked in computers and things like that. And I was working and talking with somebody because I had an outside sales job. And I said, hey, your SEO isn't set up correctly. You don't have your title tags and all these, geek terms and things that I was talking about then. And he was like, wait a minute, you know how to do this? And I was like, yeah, but I really want to sell you advertising. I'm just trying to use this to get in the door, but not realizing this was the thing. And so I talked to that person. That person introduced me to a networking group, and that led me to really start looking into like the digital marketing part as being something of value. So like I built websites and things in the past, but again, I wasn't in an environment where I heard that you can do this for a business or this is actually something you would pay for. It's like, hey, can you build a website for me? And I was like, hey, yeah, I'll do it for free. Give me a bag of potato chips or something like that. So I wasn't in the right mindset.
Yeah.
But it ended up being that. And then I had already been doing the freelance writing at the time. So I was interviewing entrepreneurs and business owners. So I started to kind of couple those things together where it wasn't just me doing digital marketing, it was me leveraging that and leveraging the connections and relationships and the interviews that I had to bring those two things together. So those were kind of like the long-winded answer, but kind of like the initial seeds of like that you are a media company mentality and mindset.
I love that. And I also think it's sometimes, again, you don't always know. And sometimes you're going down a path of a lot of rejection before you kind of realize what your skill set is. And I had that too, like, oh, the things that I just thought like everybody could do, or like it's not a thing, is now all of a sudden like, oh no, that's your superpower. And here's how you can do it to excel and stand out and kind of differentiate yourself in ways that are either going to help you build a business, get more clients, and or, help you work up in a higher level position if you want to stay within a larger company, so you could get that kind of leadership spot. And as you started to kind of piecemeal sort of clients and work together, and then be able to be like, okay, I have something here, this is going to be the business, was the ethos and kind of what you wanted sort of like, did you kind of have an aha moment where you're like, oh, this is it? Or was there maybe one client that came along and then it became like, okay, now I know exactly what it is I'm going to do with this?
Yeah, I think the maybe initial like aha moment was, when I mentioned like talking with a person in a networking group and then, starting to generate your first dollars and things like that. And I think one of the big things that I benefited from tremendously is like I mentioned, like I didn't really have like the entrepreneurial environment that was ultimately like kind of cheering me on and say, hey, you should do this, so on and so forth. So being in that business networking group, actually what it did was extremely powerful for me because it wasn't like, can you succeed? Will you succeed? It was like, we're just work. It became the norm to have a business. And I
Yeah.
think being in that environment was such a huge thing because when you're in that environment where everybody's running a business, it doesn't become, will I succeed or can I do this? It becomes like, how am I doing it on a day to day basis? So you kind of get past a lot of that. So that
Yeah.
helped out a lot. But I think probably I ran both things more separately. So I would do the freelance writing and interviewing people and roundups and all those things, and then I would do the digital marketing. So I would go back and forth between those things. But I kind of like had this, moment, I guess you could say, where I asked myself, like, it's not sustainable for me to run these two things. And I even had other things that I was running on top of that when I first started. And I
Yeah.
said, like, if I had like, all the money in the world, like what would I invest in? And I said, hey, I would invest in like a media platform or something that I can connect with the people I'm trying to serve and do all those things. And then it started to become a realization that I was kind of also building that at the same time. So that's where I started to say that, hey, this could be my secret sauce, my superpower, the thing that sets me apart by leveraging these things. And, I wish I, knew that at the beginning, but at the, definitely at that moment, it was like, okay, well, let me merge these two brands because the people that I want to connect with are the people that I'm featuring. So why not marry those two things together?
Hindsight is always one of those
Yep.
things where you look back, I'm like, that's the reason why this word exists. Because if we
Right.
knew what we knew then, it would be a whole different story. And so, as you started to kind of pull it together and realize you could kind of, create this platform and sort of leverage media in an interesting way, um, was it always your goal to kind of amplify sort of underrepresented voices, or did you kind of start to take on work and then kind of see a niche of like, okay, I want to focus that direction.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, was planted probably from the first times that I did those interviews, probably back in the Georgetown when I did that program. Like I mentioned many times, like I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know to some degree like who I was. Even coming in, at Howard as undecided. It's kind of looking for your home where you fit in, and what I found is that every time I interviewed a business owner or an entrepreneur, I felt at home. I really did. And that's why I always say like entrepreneurship to me equals hope because I feel like that creativity, the ability to create something sometimes out of nothing, most time out of nothing, and go against the no's and the things that don't go your way is very, very inspirational. But very few people actually do it. So for me, like I think at the heart of it, a business owner and entrepreneur is kind of like to some degree underrepresented just because I feel like there's not as many accolades, there's not as many opportunities for people to be celebrated there. So every time I would sit down and interview somebody, I would get excited myself just because I felt like, hey, this is my people. These are my people. This is where I should be. But also too, I had the opportunity to kind of share those stories and to learn from them and so many things. So I think it was, gradually planted over a period of time. And I think once it became apparent, like, hey, this is something I want to lean more into, then that's where I kind of try to, take the ball and run with it, so to speak.
Yeah. And is there a sort of, like campaign or strategy that's like a real standout for you in terms that like kind of unlocks some sort of breakthrough or for them, for you, or both?
Yeah, what's so funny? All those things start to come in place. So like I remember like I had an SEO client that, one of the big things around SEO is all around creating content at the heart of it. You're trying to I always use the analogy of sticky paper. So the more pages, posts, content you have on your website, the more likely you are to kind of help people to rank. But there's something called duplicate content, which basically means that a lot of times people, to get more content, they'll just simply copy and paste the content. And especially if you're doing what's local SEO, which means you're trying to rank and show up in different cities in within like where you live, you'll just simply change the city and state. You'll have the same content on the website. So that's a big no-no, related to SEO. It was definitely then like when we worked, but it's even more so now one of the campaigns that we worked on was really like working and retooling what not great SEO company had done. And we were able to kind of see like pretty quickly, largely because we were able to kind of understand those things and be able to kind of lean more into those things. So I think that's a lot of like probably one of the biggest, opportunities that we had is just like being able to kind of retool that content. So it's not just creating content for content's sake. It's being able to be strategic about like what you're trying to search for, who you're trying to serve, and how you're trying to make an impact. And being able to kind of do that, for clients and have that media company mentality for them ends up being super helpful because at the end of the day, you want to have more and more of that sticky paper so that you can start to rank, you can start to show value, and can start to, of course, get those clients and customers through the door.
Yeah, and I would love to kind of hear a little bit more sort of about kind of, your like leadership style and kind of guiding principles that you sort of operate by kind of, I know, sort of like that community first thinking and media as a medium and a mission. I would love to kind of unpack sort of your thought process around that.
I really believe, and even on my podcast, I'll ask people, for what I call their secret sauce, which is their unique selling proposition, their differentiator, what they feel sets them apart and makes them unique. So I think a lot of my leadership style comes from that, comes from like me honestly believing that every single person has their superpower, they have their genius, they have their zone, and I think it's upon me as a leader to be able to kind of serve them in terms of finding out what that is. So constantly, even leading a team, that's one of the things I'm always trying to do is just trying to understand from them like what does light them up. And don't get me wrong, like everything you do is not going to light you up. I think if you have an idea of like what that is, it ends up being powerful. And I think a lot of that probably comes from me, just like, again, coming into school undecided, is like, who am I? What do I want to do? And I want to try to, as a leader, whether we're talking about people on the team or frankly, even clients and customers, to be able to kind of understand that. So a lot of my leadership is, from that, collaborative, mentality and mindset, but also like being able to kind of leverage what I think my superpower is to make that come to light. So that's probably a lot of what I try to do. You want to try to make sure that you are very aligned, in terms of your leadership and where you want to go with your clients and your customers. And I think that that's a really big part is like having those conversations in the very beginning to make sure that you are on the same page and you have that understanding. But I think more so than that is sometimes, like you said so well, we sometimes have gifts, talents, and abilities or doing things that we don't realize because we're so close to it and we're probably so good at it. It comes naturally that we're not really shining a light on that. So even when I'm sitting down with clients, a lot of it is like, hey, did you know that no one else is doing what you're doing? And we need to amplify that and highlight that. And that should be at the top of your page. And, just having those conversations sometimes brings that about. But yeah, that's a lot of like what I try to do to try to shine a light on that, collaboration and leadership.
Yeah, and I would love to hear your perspective in terms of, marketing in a world of AI that's hugely transforming the space and like the ability to produce so much content. And I feel like there's a couple schools of thought of like more content, the better, go, 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 go. And then like, no, pull back. Let's make this a bit more strategic. No, you don't need to post multiple times a day or every day. Paired with amplifying your voice in the US particularly, where I would say, yes, media is a platform and we see use for good and for bad. And depending on what you're doing, I think there can now be a little bit of fear around really putting yourself out there because of powers that may be using platforms for interesting initiatives. So I would love to hear how you're kind of thinking about that, how you're navigating it, and then, how clients are feeling about it.
It's a interesting world. Everything's changing and it's changing rapidly. And I think a lot of it really comes down to, as a client, like what you ultimately want to achieve and how you want to achieve that. And I think that more so than any other time, like we all have basically microphones, we all have our own kind of media companies literally sit like literally right in our pockets where we're able to create content, videos, images, blogs, whatever it is, literally at a snap of a finger. So I think with that power becomes a lot of like kind of content and information out there. And for better or worse, with tools like, and consider AI to be a tool that to me, I see it as an intern, like, using things like Chat GPT as an intern because I think it could be wielded very impactfully if you kind of know what you're doing. If you have that subject matter expertise or you have that knowledge, it can start to amplify those things. But of
Yeah.
course, there are going to be the people that are going to be able to just create content and information just for the sake of doing it. And they don't have that strategy. They don't have that vision. They don't have that idea of what they're trying to do. So I think it's really hard to navigate. But I think first and foremost, we have to realize that these big, huge companies, your Amazons, your Googles, your Metas are all in the AI space. So there's a lot of, I think, misinformation out there, and even Google has said that as well too, about how AI content is somehow less than originally written content. And actually, it's not the case. You can leverage an AI content and you can make sure that it is of value so that it can serve the clients that you work with. So I think it's just understanding like how you can kind of wield those things. And I think it's going to allow that opportunity to kind of amplify that. So definitely from our standpoint, I'm definitely leveraging it, definitely looking into it, definitely seeing how it's going to improve. But we're kind of at the point where we're still very much so going through this content because it's funny enough. I feel like we don't always, as humans or people, communicate as well as we should. Like we have something in our head that we want done, but it doesn't necessarily come out that way. Whether we're talking with a person that we're trying to delegate things to, or frankly, we're talking with AI. And I think that prompting ends up being such a huge thing for AI that even when it's a perfect prompt, so to speak, it still sometimes doesn't get it right. So I think that there still needs to be that human oversight to some degree. So we still try to look at the content that's being created or we look at those things. But I think it's just like being able to kind of make sure that you're using it to amplify what you're doing. You're approaching it like it's an intern. You're just not wielding it without reviewing those things. But I think it's definitely something that's, improving. It's improving rapidly. And I definitely think you want to start, experimenting with it, testing it out. There's different tools that are using it. Pretty much all SaaS tools are I think going to have an AI component or at least market it from that standpoint. So, it's definitely in the wild, wild west, but I think, you want to be ahead of things and testing out things as much as you can rather than be on the other side and saying, oh, I wish I would have done that.
Yeah. And in terms of kind of, as your business has developed, have you started to kind of focus on sort of what niche you serve best from either like a entrepreneurial or industry perspective, where with what you do and who you kind of fit with is just kind of the magic?
We haven't niched down as much, as far as service space, but I would say maybe from a psychological standpoint, we have. From a digital marketing perspective, we definitely work with people that I say that know enough to be dangerous. The seed planted within that is that usually they've had a less than ideal experience with digital marketing in the past, and what we usually try to do is come through and try to improve that. And sometimes, it's very similar to if you've ever had a bad breakup and you're like, hey, I'm never dating again. I don't want anything to do with these people. You kind of have that same experience when you get around digital marketing or you get around technology. And that's a lot of what we try to kind of focus on. So we do primarily work on WordPress. We do SEO, pay per click,
Yeah.
advertising in those aspects, but that's more of a psychological kind of focus on who we want to serve, and who we want to work with and who we feel like we end up jiving with the best. But
Yeah.
I think we can help people in different ways, but I think those end up being like our most ideal candidates and people that we work with from a digital marketing perspective.
Yeah. And so in terms of kind of taking sort of this like inclusive approach from like a marketing perspective and thought leadership, as you sort of kind of look forward in terms of what you want to see, where you want to go from both like a CB Nation and Blue 16 media perspective, what does that look like? What are you excited and looking forward to?
Yeah, I think one of the probably the newest things that I ended up working on is new thing that I did was I became a franchise broker. And then one of the reasons I became a franchise broker is because that's another avenue into entrepreneurship. And speaking of the inclusivity aspect, I realized that everybody is not going to be the person that says that, hey, I'm gonna start my own business. I know I have an idea and I want to do that, but one of the things I really want to do is to kind of express and share as much as possible the different avenues into entrepreneurship and what that can look like. So I'm planning to do a lot more content around that specific piece because I think that there's a lot of people that don't know that that's an opportunity to get into entrepreneurship
Yeah.
and that it doesn't require you to have the idea, be able to kind of do all those things that sometimes people get, lit up by and they really enjoy doing, but sometimes people don't.
Yeah.
And, especially, we're seeing is, a lot of people are experiencing layoffs and all those things. It ends
Yeah.
up being like one of those things that it ends up being like a good step, for people, may not be as quote unquote purely entrepreneurial, but still want to start their own business. So I think that's one of the things that I'm definitely excited about. But outside of that, I think really being able to kind of like, again, just share the stories as much as I can is kind of something that lights me up more than anything else. I think when I started the podcast, it's called the IMCO podcast. One of the reasons I called it that is because I wanted to broaden the definition on being a CEO, broaden the definition of what that looks like. Because I think anytime people say CEO, you automatically say you're either that or you're not that. And people will do that. So what I try to really do, with episodes is to have different types of businesses, different sizes, different stages, just to kind of paint a broad brush on entrepreneurship and business and what being a CEO means. So I definitely want to lean more into that and be more of a positive encourager, the person that honestly I wish that I had a lot more, in my beginning days towards people that are starting and doing things and saying, hey, I did it, this person did it, you can do it too. So that's what I hope to do.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's so important and very similar to kind of the like what I do here is also just sharing different stories. And like success is just so subjective. And, I think, again, from a media perspective, a very particular narrative has been highlighted as this is what it means, whether you go to like a Kardashian level or you go to, a Jeff Bezos, or then you've got the Elons of the world. And, there's not really this like diverse pool of voices and stories and trials, tribulations, and you're not getting into, do you have a life that's full? Do you have a means in which like, outside of what you do for work, there's other things that like fill your soul up and you can actually just show up in the world and be kind to people and not be stressed out and screaming and all the things that kind of come with that. So I love to hear that. And I was curious, because of your military upbringing, is there any kind of military connected sort of spaces in terms of whether you're going from a media and or kind of storytelling perspective, given that that is such a huge component across the US? Canada over here, it's a little less like loud and proud about it. But definitely, if you land like San Diego or more, it's like it's really, in your face in terms of like that side of things. And I was just curious if that was kind of a component that sort of carried you in your future life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely always is. Like, obviously, military is near and dear to my heart. I'm in the DC area, so that's definitely the area that a lot of people are in that are in the military as well too. But I think absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we do, like with especially with the digital marketing, is we actually donate services to certain organizations as well too. One of those organizations is Nova Vets, which is Northern Virginia Veterans Association. So what I really try to do, and I was at a time where I was like stretched. I was like in so many different things. So I decided to take a step back and see like how can we donate services to organizations that we care about and we stand for and all those things. The military ended up being one of those things. So I started to really think like how can I creatively do that? And that's where a lot of those ideas have kind of come up, from that of not being either or, but both and better. And so how can I, do what I do and also be able to kind of support them? And that's where I found those kind of happy mediums. So yeah, I definitely want to do more about that, more related to that. And I think that there's definitely something there. I know, especially with franchising, a lot of the brands really say that military veterans are some of their best candidates just because of the discipline, the ability to execute, and all of those things. So yeah, I definitely want to do a lot more around that, especially in that space. But I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I mean, when people have, given of themselves for the country and for the people that we love and care about, I for one, definitely want to do what I can to kind of help support that as much as I can.
Yeah, I love that. And then, I know we talked about, kind of being the person that you didn't have when you were growing up. And I think all of us can relate to that in some way, shape, or form. And kind of that, visibility as power in a lot of ways, for people to kind of see, like, know and be around people who are either at that point, better than them or further along and give them that aspiration to kind of go to a different direction, and or just inspire them or mentor them to go wherever they want to go. From your perspective in your conversation, sort of what would be the advice that you would give to founders kind of still building their confidence and their sort of maybe media presence?
Try to find as many things as you can possibly to pour into yourself. I think definitely for me, like I mentioned, and I don't think I touched on this as much, but when I was doing, like I mentioned the networking group, but I also was doing a lot of the interviews. And at that time I didn't have the podcast, but the seeds of the podcast were being planted. I think being in that environment and pouring those things into you definitely helped me to succeed. And I think that being able to kind of find things like this podcast are going to be awesome, because when you're going through and building something, you kind of feel isolated. You feel like you're the only one doing the things that you're doing. But I
Yeah.
think what's phenomenal about this podcast is that it reminds you of another person's journey. You get to see what they're doing. You get to realize that I'm not by myself. And frankly, probably the most valuable thing is, like, I always say success is much more like a plate of spaghetti than the linear straight path that we
Yeah.
think it is. When you hit those roadblocks, and I say win because you will if you continue on,
Yeah.
and those things don't go the way that you wanted to go, you're not doing it wrong. There's other people that have had those challenges. You may learn those lessons that you can do to improve, but I think it's so important to kind of be aware and have those conversations, that and an opportunity to realize that. So I would definitely, tell anybody to, it's a tough balance, because you want to make sure that you're doing things with your, for lack of a better term, flair or your creativity and who you are, but at the same time, you're not the first person that's starting a business. So even if it's a unique business, there's principles that can be learned from every business. So if you can start to listen to podcasts, read books, go to YouTube University, you can learn a lot. And that's how you kind of stand on those shoulders of giants. And so that you can be bigger, more impactful, and be able to kind of, get to where you want to be.
Yeah, I love that. And then so does how does kind of like mindfulness and sort of like intentional storytelling and, self-awareness kind of inform you in terms of your kind of creative and sort of entrepreneurial practices?
Yeah, for me, I think it really planted the seeds for like who I am, and who I ultimately want to be. I think when we start to really look at, businesses, like this person, sells a widget A, this other person sells a widget A, what kind of sets them apart? And a lot of times it's the storytelling. A lot of times it's the why behind the business. And I think when, especially as founders, I think it's one of the easiest things that you could definitely do is to be able to kind of tell your story, to not just talk about what you do, but why you do it and how you do it. I think those things start to amplify a little bit more. And when you're intentional with that, I think so many times, and you kind of spoke to this, like you can feel like maybe I don't want to tell my story because I'm going to alienate this person or that person. But I think what we don't realize in this day and age is that the consumer has more and more choices than they ever have. They want to be able to support with their dollars what they stand behind. And if it doesn't necessarily work with the people that are not your people, that's okay. And, we start to have more of an abundant mentality and start to realize that there is more than enough opportunity. You probably can, by telling your story, talking about who you are and taking a stand, that ends up letting you be who you are. And it starts to attract the people that you ultimately want to serve. But it only happens if you share your story. It only happens if you talk about who you are. And I think that, of course, you don't want to be inauthentic in terms of like making up things or saying things that are not true, or not being in alignment with the actions and the things that you're doing. But I think you want to be, you can learn to do things better, for lack of a better term. You can learn to communicate those things better. You can learn how to lead with certain things. And I think if you can do that, and you can tap into that human component, which no one really talks about when marketing, we get into analytics and data and platforms, and I call them ingredients, and all the things that you can do. We forget that at the end of the day, these are all ways that you can communicate with people from a human perspective. So whether you're posting in Facebook, or you're posting on LinkedIn, or you're optimizing your SEO on your website, these are communication tools. So you want to speak that language of what that tool is. And if you're able to do that, you realize that if you do it well, then you're able to get the clients and customers. You're able to get the opportunity because you're connecting on a human level that nobody else is. And often you have to do that by being that human person and telling those stories.
Yeah. When it kind of comes up as like always that saying, fall down 7, get back up 8. And I think that the entrepreneurial journey is like that just never ends. There's no just like 7. You just keep kind of falling, sometimes flat on your face, but you keep getting out, dust those shoulders, like, okay, we're going again. We learn and we move forward. But I think in parallel with that, which you mentioned, which is find your people. And I think that sometimes people are lucky enough to have that really instilled in them from a young age, depending on the environment that they're around. And then I would say probably majority start to learn that a little bit later in life. And I think once you have that one person that really believes in you or like just shows you something different or exposes you to a different world than you thought was possible for yourself, then you're like, okay, I need to kind of shed some of these old layers because they are not working for me anymore. And these people around me, I'm never going to get there if I continue with that. And then you start to, I always called it like, build your community around you. Like, okay, I found another one. You like, I'm not letting you go. Now you stay. And then whether it's 2 people, 10 people, I always say you can have that like at least fill one hand with like, I'll call it like your people, like you're winning. Because that will be the sort of basis for all those falls where it's not as, I'll call it like such a spiral. You're like, ah, whatever, here we go again. Like, let's do it. So I think it's just so important for people to kind of reiterate that, change a couple of these questions, rapid fire questions for you to kind of round it out and like pull us some takeaways for everybody. I always go to some a big fan of a dance party when things get stressful, when it is a bad day, like a quote Taylor Swift here because it's just shake it off. I will blast the music, like whatever it is, it changes depending on the vibe. But I'm curious, what is your like kind of go-to power song for a mindset shift?
I like, I know, especially probably in the beginning when I started, I'm a huge J. Cole fan,
Yeah.
and he has a song called I'm blow up.
Yeah.
And it's I'm about to blow up. It gets you going. I think that that's kind of like my go-to. It's so funny because I hadn't listened to it in a while, and I
Yeah.
went back and I listened to it and I was like, oh, that's what I was missing. That's that thing. So I think, you have that track that you kind of go to. That's probably definitely one of them that
Yeah.
kind of gets me going more than anything else.
Yeah, I just found in the back of my car, I had my old pack of like all my mix CDs and
Yeah.
I started howling and I started putting some of them in. I'm like, oh, I forgot
Yeah.
what you okay. Like the stupid names you label those mix CDs. Oh my goodness. Uh,
Yes.
in terms of, a moment in your journey where you really almost wanted to quit, but you didn't, what was it and what made you continue going?
That's a great question. I think there's so many times. I think especially in the beginning, it probably was just in the beginning. Like I think you just get so self-conscious and you have that imposter syndrome. And don't get me wrong, still have imposter syndrome today. And maybe thinking like maybe I should just apply for that job or even go and apply for the job and doing those things and saying, hey, I'm not really cut out for this. But I think I'm a really big kind of, I'm a biblical person. So I read my Bible, I listen to those things. I feel like a lot of what I'm doing was not something that I wanted to do, it was something that was given to me. So because of that, I lean more into that. So it's probably, I don't know if there's a certain period, but it happens a lot where you start to say like, should I really be doing this? And I think it still happens to this day. So you have to be very wary of that.
If I heard you correctly, it kind of seems more like you sort of went back to like your core ethos slash like values a bit to kind of foundational practices when things were unclear, which makes a lot of sense. Which I know you mentioned your superpower. So one, what is your superpower? But also, if you could choose a superpower, what would it be?
Yeah, I think communication, I definitely, like I mentioned, the writing and the podcast and all those things. I really love that. That definitely is my superpower. If I could choose another superpower, I think I would love to be able to read minds as long as I could turn it off. I would love to be able to do that. As a marketer, that is a dangerous superpower because I think that's what we all are trying to do and think that we're doing. And if we're able to actually do that, then watch out. So that would definitely be my superpower I would go for.
Yeah, dangerous but effective for sure. Maybe one book or podcast that you would gift every kind of founder and why.
When I started my podcast, one of the things that came up a lot was the book The E Myth by Michael Gerber.
Yeah.
I think that that's a phenomenal book. Can I choose one more?
Sure.
Okay, so I have a lot of books. I'm an English major, so I love books,
I know, I
but
was
I'm
like,
gonna
"It's behind." I'm like, "I love."
there you go.
Yeah.
You're my people. There you go. So I will say the book that I probably recite to myself so much is The One Thing, and the kind of theme behind that book is that you ask yourself, what's the one thing that by doing it, everything else is easier or unnecessary? And I think I like because like I said, I'm a busybody. I don't always. My strength is not always focusing. So with that being said, what I like about this book is it doesn't tell you that you just do one thing. It tells you to find the most impactful thing. And even on the cover of the book, it has like dominoes, and the dominoes start out small and they start to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So all that basically means is that you find that one thing and you can build that momentum. It's going to knock over larger and larger dominoes. So it kind of gave me a different perspective on focus. And it doesn't mean that your focus is only doing one thing. It's just finding your impactful thing so that you can push those things forward.
I love that. And last and final question, in your own words, define what built for this means to you.
I love the name for this podcast first and foremost. I think it's a mantra, it's a mentality. I think it's just you having the realization that you can do this and you have the things that you need. I think so many times in life, we get told that we don't have this or we don't have that, or we're not tall enough or we're not short enough, we're not male, we're not female, all these things of why we can't do something. But by saying I'm built for this, it means that I have what I need to get to where I want to be. And if I don't have it, I'll figure it out and it'll come to me when it's needed. So I think it's such a mantra and it's such a mentality. And I think it's so counter, I think, to what and how a lot of people operate. So that's what I think built for this means. And I think it's one of the most powerful things you could definitely be.
I love it. And so, if anybody listening is curious about more of the work you do, how to kind of, from a marketing perspective, speak to you, what is the best way to connect in with you and learn more?
Absolutely. So I have kind of like my landing page, for lack of a better term. It's iamgresh.com, iamgresh.com. That has links to the podcast, to the digital marketing, to the franchising, all the things that I do. You'll see lots of links there, lots of hopefully valuable resources, and you can definitely find me there.
Amazing. Well, I appreciate you coming on. It was so great to hear more about your story, what you're up to, and all the things coming up. And I look forward to staying connected.
Definitely me too. Thank you, Jenna.
Thanks.